And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Let me tell you about our special guest. Donna Anderson is the creator of LoveFraud.com. That's a website that teaches people to recognize and recover from sociopaths. She learned about sociopaths the hard way. She married one. Donna is the author of a number of books, the most recent on senior sociopaths, co-author of 2 scientific studies. She founded Love Fraud Education, which offers webinars for survivors and professionals, and has shared her expertise on numerous television, radio, and online programs. This is her first time on Coast to Coast. Donna, welcome to the show. Looking forward to this.
Oh, me too. Thank you so much, George, for inviting me.
I'm going to ask you for definitions here for people who are going, all right, I need to know the difference between this. So first of all, what is a sociopath?
Okay, well, a sociopath is somebody who has a serious personality disorder in which they manipulate and take advantage of others. They're exploiters. Now, actually, I'm not so sure that regular folks like you and me actually need to precisely understand the differences among all these disorders, because they overlap a lot, and what they have in common is that people who have the personality disorders are socially sick. Now, I use the word sociopath as an umbrella term for what the American Psychiatric Association calls cluster B personality disorders, which are antisocial, narcissistic, borderline, and histrionic personality disorders, plus psychopathy. Sociopath currently is no longer an official diagnosis, but I use the word the way it was originally intended when it was coined back in 1930 as meaning anything that is deviated or pathological in social relations. So essentially, all of these folks are bad for the people who get targeted. And in my personal opinion, it's not really necessary to be able to parse one from the other. If somebody is taking advantage of you, is lying to you, is manipulating you, and there's a bunch of other warning signs, then the person probably has one of these disorders, and they're probably bad news.
I took your quiz on lovefraud.com, and I might be a target for a sociopath. They say the end result of the quiz said, you could be a target. Watch out for the people you're with. So I'll have you explain to me what that could mean as well.
What it means is that anybody can be a target. It's just a matter of how big a target. Because what sociopaths do is they're always on the lookout for somebody that they can use. They're opportunists. So if a sociopath meets you, first of all, they evaluate you to see if you have something that they want. Then they figure out what your vulnerabilities are, and then they use your vulnerabilities to get you to give them what they want. Now, the problem, of course, is that we all have vulnerabilities. If you want something, that's a vulnerability. So anybody can be targeted by a sociopath.
Isn't marketing sociopathic?
Well, I suppose you could look at it that way.
I mean, you look at what somebody needs, what they want, and what you want, and you go after them.
Yeah, this is true, but I suppose the difference is that if you're looking at an ad, you know it's an advertisement, and hopefully you're using your discretion on whether or not you're going to buy that product.
Does the sociopath, Donna, know what they are?
Sometimes. I've definitely heard of people who have acknowledged that they're sociopaths. I've had folks get in contact with me and say that they are disordered, say that they're a sociopath, and quite frankly, often they're proud of it. I mean, this is the difference, or one of the differences, between a sociopathic personality disorder and a typical mental illness, because a personality disorder goes very, very deep, and what it means is that this person most likely has always been this way. Folks usually start to see signs of personality disturbances when the people are in their early teenage years, or certainly by the time they're 20. So they've always been that way. Whereas someone who may have anxiety or depression most likely understands what it's like to feel good and feel healthy, and they don't want to be that way. So sociopaths quite often have been diagnosed if somebody has dragged them into a therapist or if they've been arrested. Often they're proud of themselves. I've actually had sociopaths tell me that they're evolution's next step.
Interesting. Now, are sociopaths born or created?
It's a little bit of both. The condition is highly genetic, especially with antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy, because those are the ones that have been the most studied. And so it's about 50% genetic. And what that means is that if someone is born with a predisposition to disorder, then there is an interaction between nature and nurture. So then it depends on the type of upbringing they get or the environment that they grow up in whether or not they actually do become disordered. Now, the problem, of course, is that if someone is born with a predisposition, it typically means that one of their parents is disordered, or there could be disorder back further on the family tree, but often it's one of the parents. Well, sociopaths make terrible parents. So, unfortunately, they engage in the type of parenting that will allow their, little kid to become a mini-me and become another sociopath.
What is a psychopath?
A psychopath is very similar to someone with antisocial personality disorder. In fact, there's a lot of disagreement in the mental health field. So some people describe it as an enhanced version of antisocial personality disorder, but essentially it depends on who you ask, because most of the university researchers use the term psychopath in their research, and this is because there was an instrument that is developed called the Psychopathy Checklist Revised, which is how they evaluate someone's level of disorder. And that instrument has been validated hundreds of times to be pretty accurate in determining someone, the level of disorder. So that's what all the university researchers use. And then all the therapists and the clinicians use antisocial personality disorder because that's the term that is required by the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. And they have to use terminology or a diagnosis from that book in order to get reimbursed by insurance companies, so they're going to use that. In truth, these are almost identical, but not quite the same. And now there's another definition that is making the rounds, which is called antisocial personality disorder / psychopathy, and like what a mouthful, which is why I use the term sociopath, because this is way too much. So essentially, it's somebody who has they're grandiose. They take advantage of others. They're charismatic. They have a need for excitement. Often have a criminal record, but not always. So anyhow, they're very similar, but not precisely the same.
Now, some of those traits, though, seem pretty nice. I mean, like you want excitement in your life, you want to succeed and things like that. That's pretty good, isn't it?
Yes, and that's the dilemma of these personality disorders, because especially if you talk about antisocial personality, most people interpret antisocial to mean that somebody is a hermit. Well, that's not the case, because these folks, the way they live is by taking advantage of people, and in order to do that, you need to be outgoing and extroverted and everything like that. So I do talk about this in depth in one of my books, which is called Red Flags of Love Fraud, 10 Signs You're Dating a Sociopath, and I go through the traits. And like the number one trait to recognize someone who's disordered is that they're charismatic and charming, and they're magnetic, and they seem to be a lot of fun, and they're the life of the party. Well, you're right. I mean, that sounds like fun. So,
And they sound like great traits for most people, right?
Yes, and so that's why you need to look at the entire package. For example, some of the more traits that one would appreciate includes charismatic and charming. They also tend to be very sexy for anybody who's looking for a date. That's kind of appealing. And another thing that they do when they're trying to seduce somebody into a romantic relationship is that they engage in something that I call the sudden soulmate. I mean, you meet this person and you think that they're wonderful. You feel like you've met the person you've been waiting for all your life. Well, there's a reason for that, and the reason is that the sociopath studies you, figures out what it is that you want, and makes himself or herself into that person.
Ah, interesting. Now, what is the narcissist?
The narcissist is very similar. Narcissists are, as the term is commonly known, they focus on themselves. I mean, they tend to think that they're the best and the brightest and the most wonderful. They feel like they're entitled to anything that they want. They feel like they're better than everyone else. And, you know, this term has become very common these past few years. Everybody's talking about narcissists. But then when they talk about the behaviors, to me, it sounds like they're talking with somebody who has antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy. So my theory is that they just don't want to admit that they might be involved with a psychopath, and narcissist doesn't sound so scary, so they're using the terminology narcissist. In reality, I think many of the folks are actually dealing with someone with antisocial personality disorder.
And you somehow married a sociopath.
Yeah, this guy took
and let me ask you this, Donna. Before you married him, you weren't into this. You didn't understand it. You didn't study it. This came after the fact, right?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, that's what happens to most of us, you know, who are now trying to help people who have these, who get into these situations, is that we were blindsided. When this happened to me, it was back in 1996, and nobody was talking about any of this stuff. I mentioned previously the Psychopathy Checklist Revised. Well, that had just been invented like 2 or 3 years before that, like in 93. It was when it came out. So there was no information about this. And plus, it was before there was Google, so you couldn't Google anybody. So I met this guy. I met him online, although it wasn't long distance. He only lived a half an hour away from me. And he was a total con man. He took $250,000 from me.
Oh, my God.
Oh, wait, I'm not done. He cheated with at least 6 different women during our 2.5-year relationship. He had a child with one of those women. And then 10 days after I left him, not 10 days before after we divorced, but 10 days after I left him, he married the mother of the child, which was the second time he committed bigamy.
Jeez.
So, needless to say, my head was spinning, and I was talking to my therapist and telling her about all his outrageous betrayals, and she said, he sounds like a sociopath. I'm like, sociopath? What's that?
What is that? Yeah.
That's how I got into this.
And now the name of your new book is called Senior Sociopaths. What does that title tell you?
Well, what it tells you is that they never stop. And this is actually kind of contrary to the prevailing view in the mental health field, because if you look at the research, and which I did when I was going through all this, time and time again, you'll find in the scientific literature and other articles that the experts are saying sociopaths burn out in their 40s and engage in less antisocial behavior. Well, I was 40 when I met this man, and he told me he was 49. Of course, he lied about that. Then he admitted that he was actually 51, and he didn't want to fib to me. Well, he was 55. And everything that he did, he was between the ages of 55 and 58. So this guy obviously did not burn out. And I kept hearing the same stories from other people, that they were involved with folks who were 20, 30, 40 years older than them, or they were 40, 50, or 60 years old and still doing it. So I wanted to research and document whether or not this was a thing, that it was actually happening. And that's, I did a survey of Love Fraud readers, and they verified my suspicions. People who have these disorders do not burn out.
Where would you categorize a serial killer, a Ted Bundy? What would they be?
They're probably a psychopath. In fact, Dr. Robert Hare, who created the Psychopathy Checklist Revised, he's like the guru for psychopathy. I believe he wrote about Ted Bundy. So, yes, they definitely have psychopathy. They could also have antisocial personality because, you know, they're very close. But those are the... Actually, there's other people who are the worst of the worst. Psychopaths are bad, but then there's another category of people who are called schizopaths, And these are people who have both psychopathy and schizophrenia, and they're like have no conscience, plus they're hearing voices. So they're the ones that are really crazy.
Incredible. Now, in Ted Bundy's case or something like that, were they abused as kids? Something happened to them.
I'm not sure about Ted Bundy's history, but sometimes they're abused and sometimes they're not. Because as I explained, the prime thing for anybody with psychopathy or antisocial personality disorder is that it's highly genetic. And he could have been abused because, again, one of the parents could have been disordered and would have been abusive. So, yes, plenty of people who have these disorders are abused as children. But that's not always the case. You know, I have spoken to people who have realized that their own children were disordered because it came down through the genetic crapshoot somehow, and they did their best. They took them to therapy, they loved unconditionally and all this stuff, and the kids still turned out bad. So it depends on what they call the genetic insult, and what that means is how bad a dose of the bad genetics that somebody gets. So sometimes if someone is born with a predisposition and you start working with them young enough, you can divert them, but sometimes nothing can be done.
Now, if you're not a sociopath, if you're not a psychopath, if you're not a narcissist, what are you? What do we call those kinds of normal people, I guess?
Some people call it neurotypical. I mean, I've heard that terminology. The short answer is you're healthy. You're or somewhat healthy, and healthy and reasonably able to love. I mean, this is the key difference with people who have one of these personality disorders, the exploitative personality disorders, in that they are impaired in their ability to authentically love. They just don't have the capacity to truly care about someone else and to put someone else's needs before their own, and that's a reason why they don't have the ability to authentically love.
How would you categorize a Vladimir Putin based on the things you're seeing right now?
He could be disordered, and, you know, the scary part about that is psychopaths want to win. I mean, this is their primary function in life is to win, to be in control,
sure.
To be in power.
Would Hitler be one of those too?
A lot of people say that, but I think some people have also said that he had other problems as well. But his behavior is definitely classically psychopathic.
What are the psychopaths more dangerous than the sociopaths?
Well, keep in mind that I'm using the word sociopath as an umbrella term for all of them. So if you're talking about antisocial personality disorder, which is what some people refer to as sociopath, and psychopathy, it's like almost splitting hairs. In fact, you know, there's a lot of disagreement in the mental health profession of, you know, what exactly these terminologies mean. But it more depends on the actual traits that you have, because there's this whole matrix of traits. Antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy are both considered to be a continuum and a syndrome.
All right, hold on for a second, Donna. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be back with more. Donna Anderson's with us. Her latest book is called Senior Psychopaths. Next hour, we'll take your calls with Donna Anderson as we talk about sociopaths and psychopaths and narcissists. Her latest book is called Senior Sociopaths, and her website is called lovefraud.com, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. George Noory with you, along with Donna Anderson, as we're talking about her work, Senior Sociopaths. What are the good traits of a sociopath, Donna? The ones that you find enlightening?
Good traits. Well, they tend to have a lot of energy. In fact, some sociopaths don't sleep at night or barely sleep, and so sometimes that can be good. Someone who has tangled with a sociopath, once you realize what you're dealing with and go through the recovery process, which can happen because sociopaths are extremely damaging, but recovery is possible. So if you do that, a lot of things happen. I know in my case, I became less judgmental because I figured that if I could fall for this kind of scam and a sociopath, then it made me appreciate things that other people have gone through. It also gave me or presented an opportunity, I guess you could say, to really do some internal housekeeping and clear out emotional issues because, you know, as I said, they target vulnerabilities. We all have vulnerabilities, so there's ways to really work on that. So, you know, sometimes there's a silver lining to being involved with a sociopath, and the silver lining is that it is so awful that you have to deal with it, and it makes you address things that should have been addressed perhaps ages ago. So I'm not sure that, you know, there's a whole lot of good traits about being a sociopath, but there could definitely be benefits from encountering one.
Now, if you're at a party, Donna, do you find yourself looking for sociopaths?
No, because essentially what happens is that once you understand that they're out there, and this is actually the biggest issue that love fraud faces, my prime goal is to convince people that sociopaths exist. And this is something that is like hard because I can't tell you how many times when I talk to people, they've said to me, I never knew people like this existed. And they do. But, you know, once you're aware of that and once you're aware of the warning signs, you don't necessarily have to look for them, but if they pop up, you're just much more aware of it, and you'll spot them more quickly and recognize that it's someone that you probably don't want to engage with.
Interesting take on all of this. What is science doing with all this, or psychiatrists? Are they involved in this thing in a big way, or do they just kind of back off?
Well, there are quite a few people who are doing scientific research on the disorder. In fact, I'm a member of an organization which is called the Society for the Scientific Study of Psychopathy. And so these are all the university researchers who are trying to define more precisely what a psychopath is and how it comes about. And there's lots of theories as far as what can be done, at least as far as children are concerned. They have yet to find anything that can help psychopaths as they're adults. So that's on the research side. I think on the clinical side, there are some people who are treating the targets, the people who have gotten involved with this. The consensus is pretty much that nothing can be done for the psychopaths themselves. And I agree with that because essentially, as I said earlier, psychopaths and sociopaths, or at least antisocials for the most part, are kind of pleased with themselves. I mean, their view is if you're dumb enough to fall for my line of crap and stories, then that's your problem, not mine. And, you know, they don't feel like there's anything wrong with them, so they have no incentive to go for therapy anyway. So very few therapists actually try to treat them, and if they do, you know, what's an improvement? An improvement is if, you know, somebody beats his wife only once a month instead of every day. They would consider that an improvement, you know?
Still bad. It's still bad.
The person never learns to love.
Now, could a sociopath be a nice person?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you know, that's part of, in the beginning, that they are nice to you. That's what the love bombing is all about. They're showering you with attention and affection. You know, they're planning dates, 6 months in advance. And they also engage in, technically that's called pro-social behavior, where, you're doing something nice for somebody. And they absolutely are capable of doing that, but often there is an ulterior motive. Because, I hear lots of times when, in the beginning of a romantic relationship, for example, if it's a guy who's targeting a woman, the guy will cut the grass, he'll fix the car, he'll do grocery shopping for you, he'll take you out and do all this stuff. And essentially, the objective is that he's buttering you up in order to get his hooks into you so he could take advantage of you later.
Oh, yeah, but wouldn't you rather have a guy like that do that for you than somebody who sits on the porch and doesn't cut the grass?
It's only temporary.
It's not long term then.
Beginning, when they're trying to reel you in, and once you're hooked, once you signed on the dotted line, then it's over.
So they change, right?
Exactly. And I have spoken and communicated with lots of people who told me how they changed on the wedding day. As soon as that certificate was signed, they were a different person.
I can't walk past a homeless person who, and there's a lot of them in Los Angeles, where you go into a store, Donna, and before you get in the store, they're sitting outside the post office box or the store. They're just sitting down. They got, big coats all over them, and, you could tell they want some money or they want some help. I can't walk past one without giving them something. Does a sociopath stop to help out a homeless person, or do they just keep walking?
Well, I would say that it probably depends if they have an audience. If they're walking with someone that they want to impress, then yes, they may help. But if
let's say they're by themselves, like I am.
I would say highly unlikely. Because sociopaths essentially only care about themselves. They want what they want, and they will use you to get what they want.
That's an interesting trait, to be sure. Now, what do you recommend for people who pick up your book, Senior Sociopaths, or your other books as well? You've got a number of them, to learn the signs to look for.
Well, the most common signs are really clear in the book called Red Flags of Love Fraud, 10 Signs You're Dating a Sociopath. And that's where I lay out the 10 different signs that I found through research. All my books, except for the first one. The first book, Love Fraud, is my personal story, and that reads like a cross between a true crime novel and a spiritual journey. But all the rest of the books are based on data that I've collected. And the Red Flags of Love Fraud, I did a survey of Love Fraud readers, and this was, I guess about 5 years or 6 years after I launched Love Fraud, and by this time I had heard lots of stories of what people experienced, and so I kept hearing the same strategies over and over again that the psychopaths and sociopaths would use on their targets. So I actually tested all that. I listed what I had heard, and plus I gathered narrative data. People could tell me whatever they wanted, and through that research, I figured out what the top 10 signs were in a romantic relationship. I mentioned a few of them earlier, about the charisma and charm, the sudden soulmates, the love bombing. But besides that, there are negative traits that you also will see. The biggest one is that all sociopaths lie. They tell big lies, they tell little lies, they tell stupid lies. They lie when they would be better off telling the truth. And another big one is that they blame other people for everything that goes wrong in their life. They don't take responsibility for anything. And that another one is the pity play. They try to make you feel sorry for them. So, on the one hand, you might meet someone that's charismatic and charming and sexy and thinks you're wonderful, but if this person is also lying to you and blaming other people for everything and trying to make you feel sorry for them, then you got to be careful.
Interesting take. Now is this a sociopath? Somebody's at a party, and you see somebody walk in. Let's say a lady walks in with this horrible-looking outfit on that everybody's smirking about. But you go up to her and say, you look great in this. And they do it because they want her to feel good. Is that a sociopath, or is that just somebody being nice? It's a lie.
Exactly. Not all lies are sociopathic. And, a lot of us tell white lies exactly for the reason that you said, to protect somebody's feelings or to not hurt them. So it's more the intention, and if the lie is intended to take advantage of you and to manipulate your mind so that you don't quite know what the truth is so that they can take advantage of you, then it's more likely that you're dealing with a sociopath. But the other point is that you can't figure out a sociopath by looking at one behavior. And that's why I talk about this, all 10 of these different warning signs.
It's a package, right?
Exactly. You have to see the whole pattern. I mean, somebody who's charismatic and charming and nice to you doesn't mean they're a sociopath. It's when you see the whole package that you need to be careful. How
would we categorize this disturbed 18-year-old who got shot to death in Uvalde, Texas, who murdered 21 people? He's not a serial killer, but he's a mass murderer. He had never killed anybody before. How do you categorize that kind of behavior?
Well, again, you kind of have to look at the history. I believe that they said that he had some indications of violence before this happened. And, I mean, it's a tragedy. And, there are warning signs. As I said earlier, most people with these personality disorders, psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder, you can see warning signs sometimes in young children. I mean, young children who lie and steal and who have what they call callous and unemotional traits. And what that means is that they lie and steal and they have no remorse. Then you might be talking about a budding psychopath. So I don't know this guy's history, but that is something to look at is, did the person have these traits? And, it is kind of important for society to be aware that this can show in children because it's children are the only ones you can help. Once they're adults, there's nothing that can be done, but you do have a shot when they're kids. So teachers and other health professionals should be aware of these disorders and the traits to look for, and if they see them, to try and get them appropriate counseling.
Are most criminals, and by the way, we have a huge prison listenership going on right now, that's huge, but are most prisoners sociopaths?
Well, the thing is that psychopathy has pretty good data on that. And apparently, if I remember correctly, they say that about 25% of prisoners have diagnoses of psychopathy. So, that's one of the issues is there's a lot of controversy about the definitions of both of antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy because it does lead towards criminal behavior. And, what my research shows is that, plenty of people engage in behavior that is immoral and unethical, but not necessarily illegal.
A guy who robs a convenience store and shoots some innocent bystander who's in there at the time. Psychopath?
Maybe, maybe not. And, you just kind of have to look at all of the criteria. What is his history? Has he have a history of violence? Does he lie all the time? Is he callous about it? Does he regret killing the person, or is it like, well, he was in the way, he shouldn't have been there? So you can't judge by one particular incident. You have to look at all the traits and the whole package.
Back to senior psychopaths, of course. How predominant is this problem with seniors?
Well, I look at the research of how many sociopaths may live among us, and no one really knows, but the estimates are kind of frightening because depending on which study you look at, anywhere from 5.5% to 17.5% of the population could have either a cluster B personality disorder or psychopathy. So if we take a midpoint, just for simplicity's sake, of 12%, if 12% of the population have a cluster B personality disorder or psychopathy, and these are the people that I'm referring to as sociopaths, that means that 31 million adults in the United States have one of these disorders. And if you focus specifically on people over 50, it means that about 14 million people, senior citizens, people over 50, could be sociopaths.
Now, would you say when you review your own life, Donna, that you had any sociopath tendencies? That obviously you're not one, but I mean, have you sound like you're fun, you sound like you're friendly. Those are a lot of traits, right?
Well, yes, but I don't think I qualify as a sociopath, and most people don't, because I mentioned previously the psychopathy checklist, and what that is, it's a list of 20 different traits, and the top score is for psychopathy is 40. That means that you score the highest on each of these traits. Well, most normal people score somewhere around between 0 and 4.
Ah, okay. Okay.
So,
and you may not have all the traits to be a psychopath or sociopath, but a high level of it.
Exactly. And that's, I started to talk about that previously. There's this whole matrix, and because the disorder is both a syndrome and a continuum. And what that means is the syndrome is that there's these cluster of traits that hang together, and for this test, there's 20 of them, the different traits. And then you can have each of these traits to greater or lesser degrees. So in order to, what they typically view anybody that scores 30 to 40 as, clearly a psychopath. And people who score maybe 10 to 20 or 20 to 30 do not meet the criteria, the threshold for psychopathy, but they have some serious traits that, make them not good people to be around. So it's important to understand that it's this whole matrix, and it's actually the people who are at the mid-range or the low end of the scale that are harder to identify because they seem to be normal so much more of the time.
Interesting. Donna, we're going to take a quick break and come back and take an hour of phone calls with you as we continue chatting about your excellent work next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you along with Donna Anderson. Donna, where could people get your book, Senior Sociopaths?
Well, it's certainly available on Amazon.com and also on my website, lovefraud.com. And plus we have distribution as e-books and printed books as well through other channels, like anywhere you get an e-book, anywhere you get a printed book, you can get it.
When you started doing the work on sociopaths, collecting the information, coming up with the traits, was it easy or was it difficult for you?
Well, I was on a mission because after what had happened to me, I wanted to be able to educate others about these folks that live among us. So it was a lot of work, but I wouldn't say it was difficult because it was work that I wanted to do.
And you did it in a big way.
Yeah, I've got multiple books. The website, lovefraud.com, has about 4,000 articles on there. I mean, they're not all written by me. Plenty of contributors have written articles, and plus I get articles all the time from people who are telling their stories. And this is one of the important things for folks who have been in this situation, is to read that it's happened to others. Because one of the things that happens when you get caught in a situation like this, if you lose money, although not everybody loses money, however you get taken advantage of, the person you're most mad at is yourself.
Right.
Because you say, why did I fall for this? Why did I allow it to continue? And the other thing that happens is that you feel like you're all alone. Like, no one would ever believe your story, that this has never happened to anybody else. So when you come to Love Fraud and start reading the stories, you see case after case after case of stories that sound just like yours. And although nobody wishes this to happen to anybody, in a way, it's comforting to know that you're not alone.
And since you've been doing this over how many years now?
Well, Love Fraud launched in 2005, so I guess that makes it 17 years. And in that time, I have collected more than 10,000 cases of people who've been involved with sociopaths. Is
there a stigma associated with people who are coined the phrase psychopath or sociopath?
I would imagine so, but I think it's a stigma that is deserved. The difference between this disorder and something like anxiety or depression is that sociopaths, especially antisocials and psychopaths, explicitly want to take advantage of others. I mean, they're evil. And we need to know that when people are evil so that we can get them out of our lives.
What happens if you work for a sociopath?
Well, that definitely happens. In fact, I have one chapter of the book where I talk about specifically what happens in business relationships. And the thing is that it's bad. You know, if your boss is a sociopath, probably the best thing to do is to find another job, because they don't change. And, some of the research that I did pointed out what happens in these situations. For example, when a sociopath is in a business organization, like 81% of my survey respondents said that the sociopath is manipulative. Again, they blame other people for everything that goes wrong, like 76%. 74% said they cannot be trusted. So, I mean, do you want to work with someone like that, someone that can't be trusted?
No, of course not. What would you say if you had to categorize the top 3 traits of a sociopath by percent? What would they be?
Well, it depends on, which disorder you're looking at. But for antisocial personality disorder, what we did is that we rated them according to, there's a new category I mentioned earlier, antisocial personality disorder / psychopathy. And so the top traits that we found when we asked our survey respondents to evaluate or at least describe what they saw, the top traits were manipulativeness, deceitfulness, and callousness. In
that order?
Pretty much, yes. Manipulativeness was the top, then deceitfulness, and then callousness. But they were all very close. I mean, we're talking about maybe 80% or 95% of folks who had these levels of disorders. And this is one of the important points of the Senior Sociopath book, is that I had more than 2,000 survey respondents. Now, this is a different survey from the one that for the red flags of love fraud. In this case, I asked my love fraud readers to specifically describe people that they were involved with, who they believed were disordered, and who were over the age of 50. And the key question of this research was when I asked, did you know the person both before and after age 50? And about 40% of the respondents said yes. And then I asked, what was the difference in the behavior before and after age 50? Well, 91% of my survey respondents said the senior sociopath, their behavior was just as bad or worse after age 50 as it had been before age 50.
Oh, you got a lot of people listening right now, Donna, who are saying, tell me Grandma's not a sociopath, please.
Grandma could be a sociopath. I have plenty of people who were describing their a mother or a mother-in-law, and they told me they were just as evil at 70 and 80 years old as they were when they were younger.
Wow. That's amazing. It really is. Let's go to the phones. East of the Rockies, Mike's with us in Florida. Hey, Michael, go ahead.
Hello?
Hey, Mike, go ahead.
Hey, what's up, George? Big fan, man. Big fan. I just want you to know, can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you get a little closer to your phone or speaker?
I'm going over the bridge. I got something to say. Hold on.
Okay. We'll wait a little bit for you.
Okay, let me get off the thing.
All right.
Okay. All right. Hold on.
Live radio
Hello?
at its best. Go ahead.
Yes. Hey, Mike, can you hear me?
Yep.
George, I'm sorry. Okay. Hi. Yeah, my daughter has psychopathy.
Now, how do you know that?
Okay. Well, first of all, she has autism. She got diagnosed, and she was diagnosed at 2 years ago at 12, and she, since a child, she has exhibited strange behaviors. We had got her checked with one of the best therapists in Florida, and now she has her paperwork and everything. But since you're kind of categorized as conduct disorder, they can't really give you a psychopathy diagnosis because you're too young, and they try to put you through therapy and help. But what my daughter does is she lies a lot. she on her paperwork, she also has deviant behavior, really weird sexual deviant behaviors. She's a narcissist. She doesn't have feelings. Her brother, our son, died in 2018. He was 12.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
That's all right. On his deathbed, we all were crying, and she wasn't. She doesn't feel feelings. That's in her paperwork. She's really beautiful, and she's very smart. Matter of fact, she's a valedictorian this year, but she doesn't care about any human. She doesn't care about what happens, death, spirituality, or anything. Sexual things could be like choking. When we were little, we caught her kind of hurting animals, and right now, her and her sister are kind of going through issues where they can't be around each other in our house. So she goes to therapy every Sunday. She lied to the therapist the other week. She takes phones. You have to watch her. She takes phones. And there is a cycle, as Donna said. It's not just one thing. You know, it's a psychopath. When you meet them, you get to learn the manipulative behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, we'll say, hey, honey, can you do this for us? And she says, why should I do that? Or I don't have feelings for that.
She questions everything. Let's hold on for a second here, Mark, and Mike, let's bring in Donna. Donna, the girl's 14 years old. What do you do? How do you cure that?
It can be very difficult, and your caller is correct in that conduct disorder is considered to be a precursor to psychopathy, and one of the criteria for diagnosing psychopathy is that they need to be 18 years old, and if his daughter is only 14, then obviously she doesn't meet that criteria, so then conduct disorder is that's the precursor. This is an extremely heartbreaking situation because it sounds like she got a pretty heavy genetic dose of this disorder, and as much as your caller is trying to help her, there may be limited success. And so I feel so badly, for somebody like Mike who is in this situation, and I know Mike is doing everything he can. And, as she gets older, Mike is going to have less and less influence over what happens, and that can be a really difficult situation to be in.
By not showing any emotion when her brother died, does that tell you something too?
Yes. Yeah, that's very indicative of someone with psychopathy or antisocial personality disorder. And
I guess it gets worse if you don't nip it in the bud, right?
Well, it doesn't get better, and the thing is, at 14, this is when people start to see these behaviors in someone who is disordered, so that's the typical trajectory. So the time may come where Mike will need to decide to do what's best for him and the rest of his family.
Do you commit them? What do you do with them?
There is so little commitment, no, because the thing is, someone with psychopathy is not crazy. This is the point. They are not delusional.
They could be brilliant, right?
Exactly. They can be. The girl is valedictorian of the class, so that is certainly possible. And it's quite possible that she will be able to make her way in life, but the family may need to protect itself because, another bit of research that I discovered in senior sociopaths is that, first of all, psychopaths will take advantage of everyone, especially their family members, and they don't stop. So, the time comes where people need to protect themselves.
Let's go on the wild card line to Trevor in Big Bear, California. Hi, Trevor. Welcome.
Oh, hi, George. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I hope you are too.
I am, and I just wanted to quickly say thanks to you and Tom and the Coast family for all your support. It's been wonderful.
You're very welcome, my friend.
I had a brain surgery, and you did a nice little plug for me. You really got me through it.
All right, I remember that. That's right.
Anyway, my speech is not so great yet, so please bear with me. But
sure.
I had the brain surgery, and can I say this all in a quick nutshell? Just the most cruelty I've ever experienced in my life from my 18-year marriage with my wife, and we have an 11-year-old daughter, and she took the kid and ran away right when I got home, like a few weeks later, and just incredible.
You mean after the surgery she left you?
I had to drive myself home from Loma Linda to Big Bear Lake.
After brain surgery?
She didn't even come visit me. She's not visited me one time in 5 surgeries.
Oh, my gosh.
4 knee surgeries, non-cancerous tumor, though. So, anyway, it's hard to kind of remember everything I wanted to ask, but she got a fake restraining order, made up all this stuff, home alone, possible seizures, could have died. It's just incredible. But now I'm getting better, and I'm clear in the mind.
And how do you feel about this, Trevor, personally? Do you feel...
Well, at first it was upset. I guess you could call it hatred, anger, but I didn't react to that. I couldn't even barely drive. I didn't stalk her or nothing, but I don't even know where the kid is, and I couldn't go to my work because she works next door. I couldn't run my business, and just a nightmare. Just I could talk for 2 days on this, but I won't. Anyway, now that I'm starting to get some victories, I guess you could call it, and the court's coming up in June. This surgery was March 9th.
Well, let's bring in Donna. Donna, what would make someone, the wife, leave her husband who was having brain surgery and pack up and take the kid?
That's very typical sociopathic behavior because sociopaths simply do not care about other people. They care only for themselves. So it's very common for them to not want to take care of their partner or any other family member who needs it. They can't be bothered. I mean, I unfortunately, what your caller described is just typical. I've heard of some people have told me that a woman was pregnant and going into labor, and her sociopathic husband refused to take her to the hospital. So they simply can't be bothered taking care of someone else. And plus, the whole concept of taking the child away, that's also very typical antisocial behavior. I mean, I hear that all the time, where a parent who is disordered wants to hurt the non-disordered parent, and the best way to do it is through the kids. So they do their best to drive a wedge between the other parent and the child.
I know the caller. You put on a great conference that Tom and I would go to in Big Bear, California. So he's been through a lot. He's very, he has a lot of empathy. Does that make him wrong about this? I mean, knowing him, he probably forgives her.
Well, people with empathy can often be targeted. In fact, there's like a whole subset of folks who are in the recovery community, I guess you could say, and they talk about the empaths and how the empaths are targeted by sociopaths because they are empathetic and they do try to care and they want to see the best in everybody and they feel other people's pain. And unfortunately, a sociopath looks at someone like this and says, bingo, here's a good target.
So sociopaths can target an empath.
Oh, absolutely. Happens all the time. Yes.
Are they the easy marks, the empaths?
Well, because they're so giving and because they want to see the best in everyone and because they want to help people, that, yes, it can be a vulnerability for someone who is disordered.
Wow. It's something. And how prevalent are these, I'm going to call them disorders?
Well, I mentioned earlier that nobody really knows, but all of the cluster B personality disorders plus psychopathy, depending on the study you look at, it could be 5.5% to 17.5% of the population. And as a rule of thumb, I use 12%. And I have to clarify that these are the people who could be officially diagnosed as having the disorders. But as I said earlier, there are greater and lesser degrees, so that there are certainly people who have some of the traits but not enough to be fully diagnosed. And I've never heard an estimate of how many people there are, but I would imagine that there's at least as many partial sociopaths as there are full sociopaths. So if you add them together, we're talking about 24% of the population that could have some level of disorder.
That's a lot.
So there's lots of them.
Donna, we're going to come back and take some final calls with you in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Donna Anderson with us, her latest book, Senior Sociopaths. On our next Coast to Coast program, Ross Coulthart joins us as we talk about UFOs. He's an award-winning investigative journalist. Make sure you're part of the program. And investigative reporter Cheryl Jones joins us, and she will be talking about crystal skulls, and then we'll have open lines in the last hour of the program. We'll be back in a moment with final calls with Donna Anderson as we talk about her work, Senior Sociopaths on Coast to Coast. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie back with Donna Anderson. Donna, do those sociopaths ever apologize?
Well, they can, but typically it's a ploy to get you to let down your guards in order to allow them to take advantage of you again.
Ah. Do you remember, you're probably too young, but Leave It to Beaver?
Actually, I do remember Leave It to Beaver.
Remember Eddie Haskell?
Yes.
He always was, oh, Mr. and Mrs. Cleaver, you're so nice, and then afterwards you hated him. Would you call him a sociopath?
Well, I can say that one of the traits that I found of a sociopath in a romantic relationship was a Jekyll and Hyde personality.
Uh-huh.
So, 1 minute they love you, the next minute they hate you. So maybe that's what he was showing. But again, we'd have to see what else Eddie was doing in order to determine if he was disordered.
Calls rolling in for you. Let's go to Eric in Indiana, truck driving. Hi, Eric.
Hi, George. Hi,
Donna.
Donna. Yeah, Donna. I should know that because I got a sister named Donna. I got a couple questions, really. What does a hypocrite and a sociopath, do they have anything in common? Are they pretty much the same? And on that the caller you had in earlier there with his daughter, I'm just wondering, with all the things that he had said about her, I mean, is there any kind of possession there,
demonic possessions?
Yes.
What do you think of demonic possessions, Donna?
Well, some people have suggested that may be part of what's going on. There is a spiritual aspect to this whole scenario, in my experience. I mean, there was certainly a spiritual aspect to my experience. Maybe. I'm not an expert on demonic possession, but some people have certainly suggested that. And regarding the other question about hypocrisy and sociopathy, someone who's a hypocrite, again, that's one behavior, so you'd have to see what else they may be doing in order to determine whether or not they're a sociopath as well.
Would you call sociopaths geniuses, or are they insane? Well,
sociopaths do not meet the definition of insanity, because they're not delusional. They know they're not irrational. They're not hearing voices. So they know what they're doing, that they just don't care that what they do hurts other people. Now, as far as intelligence, I mean, plenty of sociopaths are highly intelligent, but then again, there are plenty who are not, and who are just malevolent and cold and engage in crime. And it's the stupid ones who get caught. They're probably many of the ones in jail because the others who are smart enough to get what they want and maybe go right up to the line of illegality and not cross it, or they get caught and they talk their way out of it. So there's education or intelligence is something that is also on a continuum and not necessarily either or when it comes to psychopathy or sociopathy.
Let's go to Los Angeles, wildcard line. Supa's with us. Hey, Super, welcome back.
Hi, George. How are you?
Okay.
I just want to express my sorrow for for the Texas tragedies. And, of course, we had one in Orange County that was barely mentioned with the church deal down here.
Yeah.
Lots of tragedies. I had a couple of incidences for Donna. One's in the past and one's a little more recent. My brother and I were both adopted, and I got raped and molested by him. And my mother she didn't want people to know. She didn't want to look bad in the community.
Oh, jeez.
She didn't believe me, and I couldn't do anything right. We don't get along, and I had to be the strong one and forgive and forget. And he was the one that was sick, and it reminded me of another incident. I was waiting for my low-income housing here in LA, and I was at a shelter, and these two women just bullied me terribly. And I have a vision disability, they bullied me so bad, I just left voluntarily and gave up my housing. And if it wasn't for COVID, I probably would have just had to move back, to Texas. But the lady said they couldn't do anything because of 5150. I don't even know what that is, but I just feel like these criminals, these people are just getting away with it.
Well, let's find out if sociopaths, are they bullies at the same time, Donna?
Many of them, yes, many of them are. So, again, that's one characteristic, but plenty of sociopaths are bullies.
And, how do you combat a sociopath? Do you go after them? Do you fight them? What do you do?
Well, it kind of depends on a lot of factors. You have to really look at your situation and decide what's best for you. Now, in a situation like a romantic relationship or a marriage, for example, typically it's best to get out of it. In fact, our advice to anyone who is involved with any kind of sociopath is to get out, is to have no contact and to get out of the relationship. Now, if you're talking a divorce, that can be really difficult because typically what happens is that, once you decide that you've had enough and you want to get out, well, from the sociopath's point of view, that means he or she is losing control over you, so they ramp up the abuse and they make it more difficult. And so it becomes very strategic where you have to really think about what you really want and what you're willing to part with and what's most important to you. Like in some cases, some people will advise folks in romantic relationships to just walk away and leave everything and not fight. But then again, in some other cases, people need to fight in order to protect their self-esteem and to feel like they're standing up for themselves. So it's a very personal decision about what you do once you figure out that you're dealing with a sociopath.
How has Hollywood addressed this?
Oh, well, Hollywood creates cartoon characters. It's because of Hollywood that everybody believes that psychopaths are all serial killers, because that's how they're portrayed in the movies and on TV and in the news shows. And it's unfortunate because what happens is that we not only have to learn what psychopaths and sociopaths are, but we have to unlearn what we think they are because of what Hollywood and the news media has portrayed. They're all criminals and serial killers. So, and that plays into why people tend to talk about narcissists more than sociopaths because it's less scary. And they could feel like they're dating a narcissist, but they don't want to feel like they're dating a serial killer.
Next up, Alexandria, Louisiana. Cornelius is with us. Hello there, sir. Welcome.
Hello there, George and Miss Donna. Miss Donna, I want to tell you, you're doing a fine job. This is your first-time guest. And, George, this is great. We need to pray for Trevor and Miss Super and Mike because they've
been through a lot.
My problem, Miss Donna, that I ran into, I was bullied and stuff. But because my parents loved me and treated me right, and I used to work in corrections and stuff, I would talk to the inmates. A lot of times they were abused as children, either by their parents or others, sexually, emotionally, mentally, and stuff. And so they acted out. I think this 18-year-old, both of them, the white and the Hispanic, if they had been treated right as children, and George, I don't know if you knew this, I can remember when, and I happen to be African American, Miss Donna. I remember these white boys at our school. They were carrying guns and gun racks because they were going deer hunting, doe hunting, duck hunting, or squirrel hunting. They didn't care about killing humans. But I think because the Supreme Court took the Ten Commandments out, they took the Bible out, they took prayer out, and then plus abortion, and that's been over the 50-year period now, people just don't care about people anymore and stuff. When we had the Bible and the Ten Commandments, it says, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not lie, and we were given basic biblical principles even in public school and parochial school. They had that built in there. So I think because we've moved further away from God and the Ten Commandments, that's why we have the problems of today. But George, I kind of disagree with you and Howard Bloom. At 18 years old, I joined the military police corps and joined the Army and stuff, and I learned a whole lot. But before that, my dad taught me how to use a gun at like about 10 or 11, 12 years old, just to get rudimentary used to a weapon and stuff. So I think at 18, because our military, you can join at 18, you can be competent to handle weapons and stuff like that. So I don't think you shouldn't let. I think 18-year-olds should be allowed to buy weapons. And I think everybody ought to have a weapon now because we don't have enough police. So, but God bless you, George and Donna, and really enjoying the show.
Donna, back to the sociopath and the bullying again. That's kind of intriguing to me. The sociopath, why do they bully?
Because what a sociopath is primarily interested in is power and control over somebody else. Now, I mentioned that this disorder starts very young, and what happens is that when a child is born with a predisposition to this disorder, a genetic predisposition, how that manifests is that the child does not come with an inborn ability to love. And this is where the problem starts. They do not need to be around their parents or their mother as much as others. They tend to be very independent. They don't necessarily need social connections. And unless they're really taught the value of loving somebody and the value of human connections, this is how it starts to evolve into the disorder. So your caller is correct in that, a lot of the moral training that we used to get in the schools, that helped a lot in order to teach people how to behave. And with that missing, and if somebody is born without the ability to love, they don't learn to care for other people. They don't learn to be concerned for other people. And consequently, what happens is the only thing that gives them intrinsic pleasure is power and control over others. So that's why they do what they do. That's why they lie. That's why they're bullying. That's why they want to take advantage of people, because they're looking for this internal hit that they get, or a buzz often, of power and control.
Those people who stand up to bullies, what does that say about them?
Well, it says that they're human beings who are willing to protect others, and they have the ability to care for others. And this is what we should aspire to. This is what we need to be.
We should have more government leaders who are not sociopaths.
Politician is a great job for a sociopath, because all you have to do is be charismatic and know how to lie.
No,
so
you're right. And not be emphatic about people.
I'm sorry?
And not be emphatic about people.
Yeah. So there are plenty of politicians who are disordered, but there are also plenty of corporate executives and people in other high places who are disordered. In fact, I mentioned Dr. Hare earlier, and his definition of psychopathy is more stringent than the definition of antisocial personality disorder. So he says that approximately 1% of the population meets the definition of psychopathy. But he also conducted research with corporate executives and found that 3.5% of the corporate executives met the definition. So that means there's 3.5 times as many corporate executives who are disordered or who are psychopaths as there are people on the street.
Donna, thank you. You did a great job. Good luck with the book, Senior Sociopaths. First-time guest, come back again. For Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladassour, Stephanie Smith, Chris Borles, Tim Banal, Ian Punnett, and George Knapp, I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone.